Okay, while the previous video is uploading, I want to see if I can get another video in today, at least one or two more. I do want to go back to this one that has what appears to be some impact damage or something similar on this, and it doesn't look finished to me, so it looked like it may have been hafted with very crude edges and then used, right? Or another possibility might be that they were in the process of reshaping this tip to make it a much shorter point and just abandoned it because it's way shorter than some of these other reworked points. Or it could have been, you know, intentionally hafted, like I said, and used maybe for breaking apart joints between bones. Although I wouldn't want to do it with something like this because the flakes are so small, they might contaminate the meat. It's hard to get them out. I'd probably use a much bigger tool. That way the flakes are more difficult to remove from the edges. If you've got a bigger tool, there's a lot more force to accidentally chip it. This is very easy to chip, so maybe you guys can have some input on this one. Why would you apparently use and abuse an unfinished point? Or I can't see how it's not unfinished. It does not look finished at all to me as far as the edges go, unless maybe someone was messing with it, practicing on it to see if they could flake it. I don't know. I also want to go back to this one here. It's very interesting, the development on this one, the flake development. And I was thinking to myself, could I do this with direct percussion? Something this small. Or would I do it? And then how would I finish it out? Would I use pressure to finish this out? Or just kind of leave it this thick? The material is really nice, other than these pockets of concrete. And some of these are not pockets, but just exterior deposits. But there is one pocket of concrete in here. If I hold it up to the light, you can kind of see it. I don't know if I would develop it like this with percussion, because the edges are already really thin. If I tried to take them back enough to do more percussion or pressure, it would become very narrow, and it may be discarded because of that. I don't know. There's some very aggressive flakes removed from this notch here, which tells me it could be punch work. All this could be punch work. Now, do different materials leave different flake scars? Or do they leave distinctive flake scars? That's the number one hardest question to answer, I think, as far as flake scar study goes. Because if you take, let's say that I was using a buffalo horn on this, and I decided, well, I'm going to use percussion either with a punch or direct with a buffalo horn, and make a bunch of points with buffalo horn. And then if I get tired of that, I'll switch over to antler, make a bunch with antler. And let's say I was a very conscientious and curious napper, and I would go back and say, okay, this is my whole pile of buffalo horn flakes, this is my whole pile of antler flakes, these are all my buffalo horn points, and then all my antler points, and compare the two. Would there be distinctive flaking? Like, I could definitely pick out which flakes and points were buffalo horn and which flakes and points were antler. Would I be able to do that? In my opinion, no, you couldn't. Because eventually what you're going to try to do, the eventual goal is to get a certain look from the flake. And you're going to use your tool to obtain a certain look. You're not going to settle for the look that the tool produces. Do you know what I'm saying? Now, some knappers might settle for the look that the tool produces. Like, let's say your hammerstone is producing some really deep bulbs of percussion. And you go, man, I wish they weren't so deep. I'm going to try to adjust my technique so this hammerstone is going to make flatter flakes. Same with buffalo horn. Man, this buffalo horn is taking such thin flakes off the surface. I want to take bold flakes and flakes that look more like a hammerstone. So I'm going to be more aggressive and use a lot more force or whatever it takes to get the look that I want or the surface that I want. So that's the challenge. That's why I think that you can compare two piles and you're not going to get distinctive looks, at least, well, maybe in the very beginning when you're getting adjusted to how the tool works, but later on, as you develop your skill in using that tool, you're going to want to achieve a certain look of the point and adjust your technique to get that look regardless of your material. Okay, so that's my reasoning there. It's very, very difficult to tell what tool was used to make a flake because one, you can't tell if the point is in the initial stages of your skill development with a particular type of material or an advanced stage of your skill development with a particular type of material. You know what I'm saying? There may be a season of time in your life where there's lots of buffalo and lots of buffalo horn and no elk, or you prefer to hunt buffalo and you're using buffalo tools. But then there's another season where the buffalo have moved out or other tribes are competing and you move your tribe somewhere else and now your game is different. So now you're using elk antler, but you're still using the same, you're still making the same kind of point, right? So you're used to it looking a certain way. And you're making the points in the same way. That's the scenario I would think would be most common, that you are adjusting the flakes to look the way you want and not going with how the flakes are produced with that tool. You don't go with the flow in that way, because a lot of times, again, like a hammerstone will produce bulbs of percussion that are way too big. So you adjust your technique to create a look. Okay. All right. So the rest of these are going to be rather large. I put some over here so I could have enough for this full video. I still got a whole box of these, maybe 200 more points. But these are a little bit bigger, so we can look at some larger, bolder flakes. And this one may even be a Montel kind of hybrid. Might not even be a Pedernales type. But it has that large, bold, thinning flake. It has well-developed edges. It's not as thin as a Montel, so it's probably a Pedernales variant. And it has some serious tip damage. Very nice material. Combination of pressure and percussion. Some large percussion flakes and then some smaller pressure flakes. Random. But I like looking at these larger ones because it gives me a chance to see how they were developing the points using large, bold flakes, and how thin they could get it. And on stone it was probably raw. And this one looks finished, broken in use. The edges developed, and it was exposed to heat after the fact, and there's some heat pops on there. Large barb, large barbs on that one. Extremely large barbs. Edges somewhat well developed. I would say it was finished just because of the flatness of it. Yeah, I would say that this is a finished, mostly finished. Could have been broken in use or manufacture. It's hard to tell. But I love the bold flakes on this. They're awesome. Now there's a flake there. And in one of the previous points, it looked like it flaked that way because of damage, impact damage. But this one looks like a pressure flake. Base is slightly canted at a different angle from the blade, which really doesn't matter in performance at all. Now, same kind of material. This could be stage 1. This could be a later stage where it's resharpened. So this would allow, even though it's complete, it looks incomplete on the edges because it's allowing for a future life as this type of point where the bar becomes very sharp. Although the base is deeper on this one, or stem is deeper than this one, I think that these are the same type. Okay, this is just an earlier stage than this. This edge is well developed. Lots of bold flaking, maybe punch work, maybe heavy pressure. Someone very strong could develop pressure flakes like that. But this gives you an idea of how long the tool tip has to be. It has to be at least, I don't know, just by guessing, at least 3/4 inches long. Yeah, at least, because you don't want the shaft that you've inserted your tool into to bump up against this if it's a composite tool. If it's just a straight piece of antler, you can grind the antler down to fit. But the way I nap, I like composite tips. So I've got to worry about the handle, the transition between the bit and the handle striking either side. Now this could have been a strike from a handle with a composite tip when he was trying to make these notches. I get stuff like this on either the barb or the base when the handle of the composite tool strikes the protruding barb or ear. So he could have been napping down in this direction because it looks pretty clean on this side, so that he was trying to deepen that notch on that side and then struck this ear and created a large pressure type flake. That's one possibility. Okay. I like looking at this one, but I'll move on. I think we've seen this one. No, but the barbs are similar. Now on these, you can kind of tell that when they reworked some of these, they were sending in some bold, long flakes, either heavy pressure or punch work, or maybe, if you're good enough, some direct percussion work to thin down this edge as you're reworking it. Because if you just rework it on the very edge, it's going to be pretty thick. It's not going to slice as easily. I've got several with long barbs here. So this is a long slicing edge on these with the long barbs. Now, is it possible that you could work the barb all the way down to look like one of these other ones, like this? Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that it could start its life as this and end up like this, right? But the stems are different. You know, there's a different type of mentality between this stem with the sharp ears and this stem with the rounded off ears, for one thing. Next, the stem here has got random flaking, where this is generally a formulaic type of flaking where you have large thinning flakes followed by very controlled pressure to shape the sides of the stem, whereas this one, it's kind of random. So I don't think this one started out like this. But these with the very sharp barbs, I think they started out like this. And in my opinion, I would use it as a knife and not throw it at anything until it got smaller. And making a general assessment, a lot of these feel raw. A lot of this chert is easy to work raw. A lot of it's not. And I think we can start to see a pattern here that the material that's hard to work is going to be quite thick. Like this is hard to work material. There's a lot of pockets of nasty material in here. There is a heat pop there. Because this will heat treat well. They may have developed most of the blade and said it was too hard to thin down, so they put it in the heat treat and popped it and then broke it trying to finish it off, or they broke it in manufacture and just neglected it and it ended up in a fire, or a fire was built on top of it, they didn't see it, whatever was underneath some dirt. Yeah, camps were reused often, so old points were found, sometimes reused by later cultures. Sometimes they didn't care. They made their own styles. It's hard to say how often they used to find these points. There is evidence from graves from a certain time period that have points from earlier time periods as grave goods or as gifts perhaps, or souvenirs. So in a camp that was used well over many centuries, it's not unreasonable to think that some of these heat damaged points are damaged by later campfires, or maybe even forest fires started at later camps and heat popped a lot of the material that was already there, under a thin layer of dirt and not noticeable, or under a thin layer of vegetation. You can't see these under vegetation either. Nice, very, very skilled work on difficult material. Although some of this dark chert is easy to nap. You never really know. This one does not seem to include any concrete pockets, maybe a little bit of inclusion, so this may have been an easier stone to work than, let's say, this one here, although they are the same variety of chert. This one feels nasty and rough, and this one feels smooth and of good quality. Nice large piece, has some concrete in it. I would say broken in manufacture, but I love looking at these bold primary or initial flakes to thin down the blade. That's awesome. They're going in different directions as well. Not always in from the side straight in, but this one looks like it was. from a different angle. Yeah, broken in manufacture somehow with a well-developed stem. That's a shame. But discarded because if I were to discard this, that means I have plenty of this material left over. If I didn't have much of this, I would rework it. Or at least finish this edge so I can use it as a knife. Because that's still a very usable edge. Quite long, you know, as long as one of the finished points. Let's see if I can. This is finished and they were using the edge on this. You know, why wouldn't you finish the edge and use this? Maybe because it looks funny? I don't know. But that's what I would do. If I had very limited supply of material, I would reuse it for something at least. But it looks like they had plenty of it. Or having discarded this appears to imply that there was a lot of this material available. And I can't tell if it's heat treated. If it is, it's very little. It could be raw. Good possibility of being raw. Okay. Nice deep notches. Some oxidation, it looks like, after the fact. You wouldn't have this kind of oxidation right after you napped it. Very, very thin. Nice notch work. No stalling. Very thin terminations. So they could have kept going. I don't know. If I were to guess, I would guess that it is heat treated. Again, there's a chance for us to see how they develop these blades with large, bold flakes, percussion, most likely. I can't see how these would be done with pressure, unless you have a large lever device. You know, and I can't feel any preparation for the percussion like modern nappers would do. They would find and isolate. They would either find and isolate a platform or create a continuous platform. I don't see indication of either one on this, although I do see a little bit of what I would think might be a platform development there. But maybe not struck there because there was already a step. So they struck somewhere else. I would not hit that. I would take that back a little bit more. I would not strike that if that's a platform. It's too low for me, for one. And number two, the material seems too delicate for such a thin platform. I could strike that with an indirect horizontal punch, but I would only get a short flake. Maybe that's what they were after. Okay. Nice bold flaking, incomplete. Still very lumpy around the edges. Huge barb on this one. Nice thinning flakes from the stem, from the base. Lots of percussion, obvious percussion work. Very cool. Very aggressive. Unfinished. Broken in manufacture. This has got some various types of damage on it. Well made overall. The edge is sharp on this side, although it is, it does feel like maybe some brand new chipping on it, or newer and not ancient chipping. It could be have been damaged recently. This feels very recent, this damage here. Probably a previous piece of tape or a label or something. If you just found the base of this, you would think maybe paleo, as it is slightly ground on both sides. Whereas most of these, they just feel like they've been pecked with a pressure flaker and not ground. This one feels slightly ground, which would imply that the wrapping was very tight. Whenever there's a lot of grinding, I always assume that the wrapping is very tight during construction of the haft. And with sinew, it tightens after the fact, right? So it may have been wrapped with a plant material, requiring a very tight wrap to begin with, because it doesn't shrink like sinew. But most of these, I think, were sinew wrapped, except for points like this. And is there an advantage to using a vegetable wrap rather than a sinew or rawhide or gut wrap? The only advantage I've seen is that your dogs and other predators will not be attracted to steal your your hafted points. Like if I were to leave this in the yard, okay, the dogs will not go for the stick or the stone. They'll go for the sinew, and they'll walk off with this. And they'll chew the sinew right off the wood. I can't tell. It looks like it might be heat damaged. Yeah, probably so. After the fact. Nice little point. It's in line with this type. This one is a Martindale or a Bandy, but it could also be Marshall or Pedernales. As far as hafting it, I just got to figure out what type of haft. I may have to make a fan-shaped foreshaft so it expands out toward the end to accommodate these ears so they sit on wood. I'll probably, let me save some of these so I can do that. Edges on this one are sharper than normal, sharper than average. Quite sharp actually. This one, same, sharp on that one. This edge is very sharp, but it's the serrated sharpness type of feel to it. This kind of stuff I like to heat treat, but this might be raw, and it's probably a tabular type of chert, already started thin. And it's not a skinning flake of high grade. It's probably a Pedernales, I mean a tabular piece of chert. Very, very pointy ears. It tells me there's a lot of glue involved in this haft. Maybe it was a socket with a void, like in a bone. This is probably narrow enough for a bone, but there's others that are more narrow that I think may have been bone hafted, because the marrow channel in a bone is not very wide. So I would say this might have been hafted to a bone and this one to a stick. Okay, and I'll just quickly show these. I think I have time. These have very narrow stems. I was saving these to talk about it, but I'll just show you very fast. Five eighths. Okay.